Disney is back at it with another live action adaptation of a beloved animated film. And honestly, I can't even begin to describe how excited I am. I've always wanted to rewatch a film I've already seen, but instead of being a vivid and colorful animated film, it now looks like it was shot with the same lighting as a car commercial. Maybe I'm alone on that because the new live action Moana movie just recently came out to negative reviews and it doesn't look like it's doing too well at the box office either. I've had pretty much the same opinion on these live action remakes since they began. What point is there in watching a movie I've already seen, but uglier and with way worse writing? It's kind of a double-edged sword. If they change nothing and make a faithful adaptation, then it has no reason to exist. And if they do change the story in any way, it's almost always worse than the original animated film. I don't think Disney even understands why the original movies worked in the first place. They sand off anything they think is outdated, slap a DLSS 5 filter over it, and call it a day. Part of the reason the animated movies worked as well as they did is because the animated medium could lend itself to more expressive worlds. When you redo an expressive animated film with a realistic tint but still try to keep it as lively, it just doesn't work. Many of the fantasy elements end up having this awkward, uncanny look to them. It doesn't help that despite having hundreds of millions of dollars as a budget, the CGI in these movies looks abysmal. I don't know what it is with modern Disney, but even the recent MCU movies have such ugly CGI. It's insane to me that a movie like Transformers with all these moving parts can look almost real, and it came out in 2007. Then today, some of these actors look like rubber dolls when they have CGI coating them head to toe. I want to say that it's because everything is shot on a green screen set these days. Or maybe it's because they export a lot of their special effects work overseas in an attempt to save money. But these movies still have the biggest and most bloated budgets you'll ever see, so they're not really saving any money there. I think Disney treats their VFX workers like it's a sweatshop. There were reports that talked about the insane timelines Disney imposes on these guys. They don't want to allow them the time it takes to make sure it's done properly. They rush them, then dump them onto the next big MCU movie to work on a new CGI monster. It's kind of sad to see. I grew up with many of these animated films, and instead of giving kids their own original stories to grow up with, they get repackaged versions of the ones today's adults had growing up. The modern remakes feel so soulless, mostly because they are driven solely by a corporate strategy instead of artistic imagination. The ghouls in charge of modern Disney don't seem to understand why that distinction matters. When the entire team behind the film aren't expressing any sort of fresh artistic idea, then the whole thing comes across as lifeless. Relying on nostalgia to keep you afloat will only capture a very specific audience. It's appealing to Disney because you start with an advantage. Original IPs don't have a pre-built fan base or any emotional attachment before they even come out. So it seems like an easy tee-up. Redo an animated film in a new format and you capture both the original fans and can get the kids of today hooked as well. And that strategy worked for a while. The Lion King remake grossed over $1 billion at the box office. But the well is running dry. Snow White was a bomb, and now Moana is looking like a flop as well. Part of the problem is that Moana defies the only reason you have for seeing a movie like this in the first place. If you're relying solely on nostalgia, then you need enough time to have passed for people to be nostalgic. Moana is barely 10 years old. I have a feeling The Rock forced Disney into adapting this early because he doesn't want to be too old by the time they eventually get around to it. And by playing their hand early, the only reason for this movie's existence disappeared. I also can't get past how lazy the whole concept feels. You see this everywhere. The games industry, movies, television. It's like all at once, everyone working in the entertainment industry just gave up. Games come out unfinished and unpolished. They rely heavily on pre-built franchises and remakes. The few successes we do see are immediately overshadowed by the flops that follow. What happened to the ambition? What happened to the people who got into these industries because they wanted to make the best movie, game, or whatever they could? I could do a whole separate video on just that topic alone, but let's stay focused on the flop in front of us for now. I don't even think the actual people working on these movies are lazy. The cast, crew, and artists are all probably extremely talented individuals. I just think they've been trapped by a soulless corporate machine that forces them to spur out the same retired ideas again and again. I understand why, though. Remaking old movies is extremely risk-off on paper. There's no need to take a gamble on an untested new idea where you'd have to come up with a new emotional story when you can just redo the old one that's already popular. For a company that's been struggling recently, I can definitely see why remakes would appeal to them. But that's just a band-aid fix. If you don't fix the underlying creative problem, then you'll continue to bleed out. And the damage isn't limited to just one bad movie. Every mediocre remake spends a little bit of the audience's trust. Disney used to function almost like a promise. You saw that castle at the beginning and expected something special. Once that logo becomes associated with disposable content, rebuilding that confidence is much harder than recovering from one bad opening weekend. I think a lot of parents get sucked into this trap Disney is setting up for them. They turn nostalgia into an obligation. Because you got to enjoy these stories as a kid, you feel obligated to give your kid the same feeling. But it's not the same. The original movies became classics because they were new when audiences first experienced them. They had their own unique identities, and they weren't dependent on an older, more beloved version. The attitude behind it is almost sinister. Disney treats live-action photorealism as if it's an upgrade over animation. This implies that the animated films were the ones that were incomplete or lesser versions. That whole mindset is so ass backwards. When animation is the sole reason for your company's success, the medium deserves to be treated with a little respect. I never understood people who immediately discount animation as if it's a lesser format for storytelling. It's usually the opposite. Realism is usually a lesser format for storytelling compared to animation. Animation frees creative storytellers in so many ways. It allows for more expressive movements and emotions. It doesn't restrict them in the same way real people or real environments do. It also allows the more fantastical elements of a story to feel more natural. Talking animals feel way more natural in an animated film than a dubbed over photorealistic CGI lion. The term live action isn't even accurate. In the case of the 2019 Lion King movie, it's just photorealistic animation instead of a hand-drawn 2D animation. Now, of course, they couldn't get real lions to sing and dance, although I would have definitely paid to see that. But it does kind of defeat the whole purpose of doing a live-action adaptation. Even the musical numbers lose a lot of their theatricality due to the restrictions photorealism deploys. Animation lets these sequences be fast-moving, colorful, and visually unpredictable. The remakes try to preserve realistic worlds while presenting fantasy music numbers. This creates an uneven tension. The music wants to explode, but realism keeps pulling it back. Stuff like this kills the original spirit of these segments. Plus, you won't ever stop mentally comparing the two. Even if you're trying to enjoy the remake, you'll keep thinking of the original scene and original music, and chances are the remake pales in comparison. You can try your best to enjoy the new one, but I know deep inside you'll wish you were just watching the original. The people making these movies know it too. Every change they make to the story feels defensive. They look back at these movies that were made during a different time and go, ooh, that might have been offensive, or ooh, we need to change how that happened. The remake of Snow White was made with this mindset. That was a movie made by people who held no respect for the original in any way.
I mean, you know, the original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird.
Super weird.
So we didn't do that this time.
Imagine the ego it would take to think you know better than the people who created the original all-time classic film. Fairy tales don't need you to come along and over-explain the message. They often work because they're simple, symbolic, and have straight-to-the-point, wholesome messages behind them. They let villains be villains. They let the magical elements be played straight. They don't weaken the delivery by adding some misunderstood sob story background for the villain. Sometimes simplicity can be a better delivery mechanism for your theme than trying to soften it at every turn. This sanitized version of classic stories just adds to the soulless feel of the whole thing. If you're making changes to an old movie and you're rewriting it to sand off all the edges or make it feel as safe as possible, you also make it feel overly corporate. And for a big conglomerate like Disney, that's the last thing you want audiences to feel walking out of your movie. Maybe I was just a kid, but you used to walk out of a Disney movie with those warm, fuzzy feelings. Now I leave feeling the same way I do after leaving a work meeting, just a little bit more dead inside. It undermines the entire legacy the company tirelessly built up. Disney built its identity on family values, and now it seems like they're doing the opposite. By acting as if the classic movies had something wrong with them or needed modernization, you retroactively take a dump on your entire legacy. Animation was what made Disney distinct. They're devaluing the art form that they used to reach the cultural significance they now have. This also sends the message that they have no faith in their future. The obsession with remakes implies that Disney has more confidence in its older library than in its ability to create anything new. And honestly, they're not really wrong for feeling that way, but that's not really a good thing. It's also kind of funny because Disney does come out with new animated films as well, but now those films need to compete with remakes of their own classics. And trust me, you do not want this competing with anything Disney made before 2020. It almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Disney will give the more recognizable remake the giant budget, the prime release date, and the massive advertisement campaign. Then it gives their original movies a weaker push, they watch it struggle, and conclude that audiences no longer support original stories. Of course, familiarity wins when familiarity is the only thing the company treats like a viable product. How can any of their original movies get a chance to perform well when they don't promote them in any way and push them straight to streaming? It's like leadership knows they can't make quality original movies anymore. I also need to add an important clarification. Remakes are allowed to exist. My argument isn't that a remake is automatically worthless. Many classic movies are actually remakes of even older movies. The Fly 1986 is a remake of the one from 1958. The Thing 1982 is a remake of The Thing from Another World from 1951. Even Ben-Hur 1959 is a remake of a silent movie from 1925. Disney has even shown that they can do this as well. Whether you love them or not, movies like Maleficent, Pete's Dragon, and Cinderella at least had new identifiable approaches of their own. They changed the perspective, tone, or characterization. You could explain why those versions existed without relying on a straightforward shot-for-shot retelling of the original. The difference is that those movies had a purpose behind them. Remakes should have a stronger creative purpose beyond recognition alone. They need to have either a different tone, a new perspective, or be a stronger interpretation. Many of these movies went on to become classics, but where are this generation's classics? What happened to the game I used to love? I remember every Disney Pixar release was a massive event. Almost all of their movies were huge cultural milestones. It seemed as if they were incapable of missing. They could take ridiculous and mundane sounding ideas and make a classic out of them. Fish movie, check. Car movie, check. Rat Chef movie, check. They could make a banger out of almost anything. Now what do we get? Remakes of those classics or sequels to franchises that started 20 years ago, and all the kids who grew up with them are adults themselves now. How are parents supposed to bring a kid to the 5th movie in a series when they have no connection to those characters at all? They're just so creatively bankrupt they don't know what else to do. We are in a golden era of technology. Things that restricted creatives before should be easy to overcome now. But for some reason, everything today is uglier and has less personality than the versions that existed decades ago. A modern classic shouldn't be an impossible task. It shouldn't be difficult for a large team of people with hundreds of millions of dollars to come up with a movie that captures a child's imagination, especially when they were doing it decades ago with every limitation you could think of. Movies today have more advanced technology, larger budgets, and are capable of greater visual detail. Yet the results often have less charm, less personality, and less emotional impact. It's even more embarrassing because Disney should be the ones leading, not the ones recycling because they're out of ideas. They're at the top of the food chain. All other studios should be looking to follow their example. But recently, Disney has set such a bad example that studios are now learning all the wrong lessons. Even DreamWorks is now starting to recycle their old animated movies as well, turning How to Train Your Dragon into a live-action movie. It's almost like Disney is leading them down a dark and lazy path. I want to see studios start to take risks again. It's kind of weird. They'd rather dump a big bloated budget on a remake instead of greenlighting smaller budget, more creatively led projects. People will try to make the argument that you just shouldn't watch them if you don't like them. And don't worry, I'm way ahead of you there. But you also need to understand the opportunity costs as well. Every time Disney greenlights one of these remakes, it takes resources away from what could have been the next great original Disney film. These remakes don't appear out of thin air. They take massive teams years to create. Imagine if these resources were put behind a series of smaller projects instead of wasted on one big unoriginal swing. It's a little off topic, but look at Obsession and The Backrooms. These are movies that had unique ideas and with modest budgets grossed hundreds of millions of dollars. I think Obsession is one of the most profitable movies in history relative to its budget. I'd like to start seeing more stuff like that. Unique ideas with a team that actually cares. Anything but recycling the same crap back to us over and over again. Disney's live-action films feel so soulless because they just don't care anymore. The passion and love for the game is gone. It's now about pursuing profits over pursuing anything new. In just a few years, Disney went from generating classics to being so desperate for a hit that they're now digging up the graves of these old films and trying to give them a paint job in the hopes of making an easy buck. But I think audiences are finally catching on to how lazy these adaptations are. Disney got lucky that a few of them were successful, but I think the gravy train's over. Audiences want to see new ideas, new characters, and new stories instead of the same stuff we've already seen. I hope to one day see Disney return to its former glory, but honestly, I don't think they even care enough to try. Anyways, let me know if you agree with me. Are you guys a fan of these live action remakes, or would you rather see something new? Let me know in the comments, and I'll catch you on the next one. See ya.